The public was given the opportunity to submit public comments electronically. For the record, we have received no public comments.
You're not live yet. 1 minute, sorry.
Oh, we're still
We'll
not.
wait till we're live.
Oh, okay. Was rehearsal.
That's all right, Ernesto.
We do have a quorum.
John Seymour is here.
Now we can get started.
Okay, we're good.
Good? Yep. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Anaheim Public Utility Board meeting to order. The public was given the opportunity to submit public comments electronically. For the record, we have received no public comments. This time I'd like to get a roll call of the board members.
Board Member Guyona,
Present.
Board Member Bala, Board Member Abdulrahman, Board Member Abdulrahman, I can see you, however, I can't hear you. Board Member Baroldi, Board Member Showalter is absent tonight. Vice Chair Seymour
Here.
and Chair Madrano.
Here.
Let the record show that we have a quorum.
Thank you. First item we have on the agenda is the approval of the minutes, the April 22nd meeting. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes? And if
Yes,
so,
this is
I'll
John.
entertain a motion.
This is John Seymour. I make a motion to approve.
Motion made by Vice Chair Seymour. Can I get a second?
I second it.
Second.
Second from Member Gaon, I believe?
Bala.
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry?
That's not me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Member Ravneesh. Can we have a roll call vote?
This is a roll call vote for item number 1. Board Member Gaona,
Aye.
Board Member Bala, Board Member Bala,
Yes.
Board Member Abdulrahman. You. Board Member Baroldi,
Did we get a yes for AB?
yes, I saw him, I can see him, but I can't hear him.
You, this is a hand, right in the hands.
Yes.
Alright.
Board Member Showalter is absent. Vice Chair Seymour
Here.
and Chair Madrano.
Present. Yes.
So the vote is 5 ayes and 2 absent. Motion carries.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda, we have the utility financial overview of the fiscal year 2020-21 proposed budget. Mr. Lee.
Yes, thank you, sir. Tonight, Brian Billner, our Assistant General Manager of Finance Administration, will be providing this presentation. Brian?
Thank you, Dooku. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Typically, we propose our budget to you in April, or we actually present our budget to you in April with ask for a recommendation to the City Council in May. We did mention to you last month that we would have to delay that presentation to this month as we reworked our budget in response to the shelter in place and the emergency orders by various state, local, and city orders. In that vein, I would like to present to you a 3-part presentation. The first part will be a state of economic, what the state of the current economic situation is for the department, what our mitigating strategies are, our efforts to assist our customers, and then followed by the presentation of our fiscal 2021 budget. So with that, Peggy, if you'll move to slide number 2. I don't think we really have to belabor the point on what is actually happening and how different agencies are affected. I think all of us are affected at some level by this current emergency. Utilities are in a unique situation in that we are an essential service for the community. And as such, we need to be prepared to continue to provide that service regardless of the severity of the emergency or the situation that we currently are in. Anaheim is also in a unique position in that most of our revenue, as I'll go in further detail later in this presentation, is derived from our commercial industrial sector, with a large portion of that now shuttered due to the emergency. Peggy, if you'll go to the next slide. We're on slide number 3. So this just goes over the topics we're going to discuss today. And if I'm speaking too quickly, or if you have a question, please interrupt so I can address whatever question you have as I go through. This is a meaty presentation. There's a lot of information. I'll try to go through it relatively quickly, but I do want to make sure I hit all of the topics that we need to cover. As I mentioned, we're going to cover the financial impact of COVID-19 and our response and our mitigation strategies, how we assist with our customer bills and our proposed budget. And Peggy, if you'll fast forward to slide number 5 for me. So what is the impact on the utility? Well, this fiscal year, in fiscal 2020, we're seeing a revenue reduction of $26.1 million to the electric utility. This is out of a revenue pot of about $400 million a year from our various sources of revenue from both our customers and wholesale transmission and other sources of revenue. So it is a relatively significant hit to our revenue stream. There is a small offset. There are some costs we are able to offset, but as you can tell, we do have a net variance this fiscal year of $20.7 million that we need to fill. We have been able to find some savings in reducing our operating costs, but the main hole is going to be filled by our financial reserves. We have financial reserves to cover it. We have ample reserves this year and next year to cover these potential losses. However, this is not a strategy that we can maintain ad infinitum. We will propose in this budget the deferral of some capital programs. As you recall, part of our capital financing strategy was to issue debt for a portion of our capital and to cash or rate fund the balance of our capital. In order to maintain that strategy, we will have to defer some capital. We do not think it's a prudent move at this point to borrow more money to continue to fund our capital plan. I think that puts us in a worse situation if this goes on for a longer period of time or for when the next emergency hits, and there will be a next emergency. We also are proposing a reduction of various operating expenses. You can see some of the items there in the box to the left. We will maintain vacancies. We will prioritize and defer our fleet. We will try to use our fleet for as long as we possibly can without replacement. Some technology upgrades we had planned, we're going to defer. We're going to defer the one-stop shop that we presented to you earlier. And obviously, travel and training is not going to happen, at least in this fiscal year and probably next fiscal year. You're not going to see employees traveling for any kind of conferences, seminars, or any other training events. And then on to the next slide. So we ran three scenarios. The scenario showed here is our base case, what we assumed was going to happen before COVID-19 hit. What we show is our financial reserves. So Peggy, if you show in fiscal 2005, we had 331 days cash, which is probably too much money to have in the bank for our agency. So we did plan to spend some of that down. I'm going historically to kind of give you some context of what happened to us in the Great Recession, how we rebounded, and how we plan to come out of it. We did spend some of that money down, and in the belly of the recession, you can see our cash reserves did dip quite significantly. We did see about a 10% reduction in our load, which then obviously hit our revenues pretty significantly. We also had significant impacts to our ability to incur debt. So we weren't able to fund our capital plan nearly to the level that we had hoped. We'd implemented some strategies in order to provide some resiliency to our financial system. This included some additional reserve strategies, some rate strategies, and some financing strategies. And we were able to come out of the Great Recession and build our reserves back up to a pretty responsible level. So you can see, Peggy, if you draw the cursor up to 2018-19, you can see we brought our reserves back up to over 200 days cash. For context, in today's dollars, 1 day's cash for us is about $1 million. So you can see about how much money we had on hand. We did plan to spend that money down as we continued, because again, we wanted to get to our target level and spend more money on capital through our cash as opposed to issuing debt. Again, this was our base case scenario before COVID-19 hit. Maybe you can move to the next picture. So down below, this picture assumes that the shelter in place is going to continue through June of 2020 through the end of next month. So I want to focus on the right-hand side of the chart. You can see that our cash reserves are going to be spent down even further than we had originally anticipated. As our revenue softens, we will spend some of those reserves down, and we will bring them down to our target levels. However, if you go to the next quadrant, if this emergency lasts through the end of the calendar year, we don't know when it's going to end. We don't know if there's going to be a resurgence. We don't know what's going to happen. But if this lasts through the end of the year, you can see what happens to our cash reserves over the next 4 years through fiscal 2024. They dip down to a fairly precarious levels that are below prudent for an agency of our size and complexity. The various rating agencies would prefer to see our reserves at that red level, as would I. In order to be able to withstand further shocks to the economic system, we need to have these reserves. So right now, these are the various different scenarios that we're working with. We assume that it might be something in the middle between the two scenarios at the bottom. But again, I think if you ask 7 different economists what they think the future holds, you'll get 10 different answers. So I don't think we're going to know until we actually experience what's happening to our sales and to our customers. You go to the next slide. Where do we get our money? How does our money come in? Our revenue forecast shows that in fiscal 2020, we should collect about $400 million from our various sources of revenue. And this is how it breaks out. As you can see, most of our revenue comes from the commercial, industrial, wholesale, and transmission sector, with only 23% coming from our residential customers. And those are the customers using more electricity than the others. If I look at our April numbers, our residential customers were up 4%. Our commercial customers were down 19%. Those are customers that are typically customer facing. They have their shops, retail stores, hotels, things. They're businesses that need people to interface with. Industrial customers are different. They could be factories. They could be large industrial customers. They're also some of our larger resort customers as well. In April, I just right now have April numbers. Industrial sales were down 9% compared to what we expected. So this is kind of goes along with, I think, what you would expect: residential being up, small and medium commercials being way down 18 to 20%, and industrials down 9 or 10%. But if you look at our cost forecast for 2020, most of it's power supply, and a lot of that isn't avoidable. They are contracts that we have. It's debt service associated with power plants or transmission lines. There are costs that we largely can't shed. Labor is a very small portion of our cost components. So again, if we get concessions from labor, if this continues, it won't really move the needle all that much. And debt service is fixed. We issue fixed rate debt, and it's fixed unless we refinance that debt. And we don't have any callable bonds right now. So our costs are largely fixed. About 97% of our costs are fixed, and only about 3% are variable. So we don't have a lot of room to move on our cost structure. We're built to collect our costs, and as an essential service, we try to fix our costs out so there's not a lot of volatility in our costs for our customers. There's predictability and consistency in our costs. So if this continues, we're going to have to look to other avenues in order to fill that gap. You want to move to the next slide? For further comparison, I just want to highlight the fact that 85% of our residents, or 85% of our customers are residents of our retail customers, but they only make up 27% of our revenue. So as that commercial industrial sector continues to have weakness or continues to be depressed, that's where we're going to see significant softness in our revenue streams. We won't be able to make up for it in the residential sector like a bedroom community might. A bedroom community might be able to weather this storm much better than we can because the residential sector is seeing significant improvement or growth, if you will, in usage, as you would understand, because everybody's home with everything plugged in, kids are home, parents are home working. So, but we don't have the same luxury because we are more dependent upon the commercial industrial sector. This has typically served us pretty well because they're more resilient and they have less stress on our revenue stream. We don't suffer a lot of write-offs, et cetera. But right now, it's coming back where this sector with its softness is starting to hit our revenue. Thank you. On the next slide. This is an example of one of our largest commercial industrial customers. So what this chart is showing you is in March of 2019, on a day-by-day basis, what percentage of their peak demand that year that customer used. So if their peak demand was at 100% for the calendar year, on a day-by-day basis, they used anywhere from 70 to 90% of that peak demand. So let's say their peak demand was 10 megawatts, they used anywhere from 7 to 8.5 or 8 megawatts per day, every day. Okay, if you advance it. But in March of 2020, this is what we saw from this same customer. If you remember, on March 12th, that's when Rudy Gobert of the Utah Jazz announced he was, actually March 11th, he announced he was positive for COVID. Tom Hanks announced he was positive on March 12th, and the resort shut down on March 13th. So you can see what happened to demand for that one customer over those days for the rest of the month. Now, we do have a rate mechanism called what's called a ratchet. This allows us to collect 50% of their demand charge based on 50% of the demand of what their peak demand was. If their peak demand was 10 megawatts, we can bill them for 5 megawatts if the peak demand over the year was 10. So if they fall down, you can see to 3 to 4 megawatts, we can still bill them for 5. That's really to recover the cost of the infrastructure needed to serve a customer of this size. So we still have some revenue resiliency. Some of that gap you can see is still recovered, but we don't recover near what we recovered in March of 2019. Are there any questions as we move forward?
Not yet.
Okay. Taking the next slide. So looking forward, these are those same 3 scenarios I talked about before. The blue is our base case. So what we just assumed life would be like back in December and in January, that life would just go on, and this would be our revenue for each fiscal year from our customers. This would be our retail sales revenue. It dips a little bit because there's obviously solar and efficiency, and there's other impacts to our revenue stream, but overall it's pretty stable. The orange, again, is that shelter in place through June scenario. So you can see a big dip in fiscal 20. It comes back up a little bit in 2021 with a full rebound in 2022. So a little bit of a V, if you will, a V recovery. You've probably heard that term. If we have a prolonged economic downturn, though, you're going to see a severe reduction in our sales in fiscal 2021. You're looking at going from $360 million to maybe $310 million in revenue. That's a big hole to fill. And we don't have a lot of options to fill that hole except reserves or rate actions. There's not a lot of options on the table. So if this continues past summer into the end of the calendar year and tourists don't come back, people don't come back, people don't go back to work, we will have a big hole to fill. And we'll have to have pretty significant discussions with the board about how to fill it. But we do feel that the economy will rebound in 2022 with a full recovery in 2023. Again, these are speculations. This is solely based on the economic data that we have at our disposal. But it's only as good as the assumptions that we put into it. Go to the next slide. This will show our financial reserves under those three same scenarios. So you can see under the gray scenario, the shelter in place probably through the end of the calendar year, if this prolongs or there's a resurgence in the fall, our reserves, as I showed earlier, will be far below what our target levels are. Thankfully, we have the reserves, but those bullets will be expended from the chamber relatively quickly, and we won't have the resiliency or the ability to bounce back if this prolongs even further or if there's another shock to the economic system. We go on to the next slide. This is our debt profile. The table on the left is our annual debt service. This is our annual mortgage payment we need to make every year. We currently have debt issuances planned in 22, 24, and possibly 29. So you can see our debt service on a year-by-year basis is relatively flat until the middle of next decade when it starts to drop and drops precipitously. We originally did this on purpose. With the need to get to 100% green energy by this period of time, we need to have room in our portfolio to fill that hole. If we have a lot of costs, we don't want to have a lot of debt hanging around our neck as an albatross. So if push comes to shove and things start to continue to progress and we can refinance debt, we can always restructure this to levelize it out a little bit more, reduce it down from the 60 million a year to maybe 40 to 50 and increase the back end years. It's not an optimal solution, but it's a short-term relief option with obviously long-term ramifications. The chart to the right shows our actual balance, our debt balance on the electric side of the house on a year-by-year basis. Again, we want to be relatively debt-free as we move to more and more carbon-neutral fuels, and that's the plan. However, plans can be thrown out the window as things progress if necessary. But we do have options if we need to use them. That's the current financial forecast for the electric utility. Again, there's no need for dire action now if we continue to move at the pace we're moving, as long as the state is continuing to recover and we're seeing green shoots in the economy lately with restaurants opening and possibly moving into stage 3. We're hearing talk of the resort area possibly opening back up this summer at some limited capacity. So we are hearing the rumblings of a resurgence in the economy. So hopefully it's that orange scenario I showed and not the gray scenario. But again, we have to be prepared for the gray scenario. As I like to say, you plan for the worst, but hope for the best. So how is this affecting the water utility? So Peggy, if you want to move to the next slide. Water is not as impacted by the economy as electric is. Water use is primarily driven by aesthetics and consumer use. It's not driven by economic need. So we're not seeing near the impacts to our revenue as we are seeing it on the electric side. Again, we're deferring non-critical capital. You can see some of the projects we've deferred on the left. We are reducing some of our operating expenses, some of the similar operating expense reduction that we saw on electric. We aren't having near the impact on the water side. Our annual revenue for water is between $85 and $90 million a year. So it's a relatively modest hit to our revenue, not near the hit that we saw on electric. So as you can see, we are filling the hole with a little bit of use of reserves and a little bit of reduction in operating costs. Thank you. Move to the next slide. Again, this is similar to electric, our water reserves. As you can see, during the recession, we did spend some of our reserves down to our target balance. We tried to keep it there. But as we move forward, we developed a very healthy reserve. In 2019, we had 309 days operating cash. This fiscal year, we're looking at 306 days operating cash. But on the base case scenario, we plan to spend that reserve balance down on capital and issue less and less debt. So we built it up for a purpose, but we can also use it for the emergency as opposed to capital. So we have options. We have a lot of options on water. There's a lot of liquidity on the water side. If you go to the next quadrant. If the shelter in place again lasts through June, you can see that the hit to the reserves is not nearly as significant as electric, but we do draw our reserves down a little bit more. And if the shelter in place or the emergency lasts for a prolonged period of time, Peggy, if you move to the next, you can see that hole. Even though water is not driven by economics necessarily, if businesses remain shuttered, if customers remain unable to pay their bills, then we could see a significant hit to our reserves. Again, this isn't the scenario we are planning on. This is the scenario we have to prepare for. And next slide, Peggy. We're now on slide 16. So for context, residential use is a much greater proportion of our water revenue as a percentage of the whole as compared to electric. So you can kind of see the makeup. As residential customers, they use water, as I said, primarily for aesthetics, hygiene, etc. It's not driven by the economy, a little bit by weather, but it's relatively stable. If you look at our revenue mix on water, 86% of our revenue comes from our variable charges. That's just the charges we charge customers for every unit of water they purchase from us, while 14% is fixed. In contrast, our expenses are 60% variable and 40% fixed. So 86% of our revenue is variable, 60% of our costs are variable. So there's a little bit of disconnect like with electric, but not nearly as big of a disconnect. Our only variable cost is our water supply. But if every agency starts to use less and less water, our water suppliers will naturally have to raise their rates because their costs are largely fixed. For our water suppliers, especially Metropolitan Water District, who right now is our largest water supplier because of PFAS issue, the water to them is free. It's really how do they get the water to us? All those costs are largely fixed. All the infrastructure to move the water and the cost to move the water is largely fixed. So if the volume of water that they sell drops, then their rates will naturally have to increase. So our water supply costs will remain, over the long run, relatively stable with some variation in between. On the next slide, 17. So again, it's a similar mix of customers. Residential customers, again, make up about 85, 86% of our total customer base. And as I showed before, they're 58% of our revenue. So because they're home, they're using water, they're using more water than they probably anticipated. So bills are a little bit higher. I do want to talk a little bit about bills. People, you are reading the newspaper. The LA Times had an article yesterday about utility bills and customers' inability to pay. We are not disconnecting customers right now for obvious reasons. But that does mean that our accounts receivable balances are rising. They've risen by about 20% over the last 2 months to balance from our residential customers. We usually have a balance of about $8 to $10 million on the books that we need to collect from our customers. That's risen to about $12 million. And the number of customers that are in arrears to us has grown from about 25,000 to about 40,000 customers are in arrears right now to us. I don't necessarily think that there will be a large write-off, or those customers won't be able to pay their bills in the long run. We saw in the Great Recession that customers paid their utility bills over time, even ahead of their mortgage. You saw a lot of foreclosures, but we didn't have a lot of write-offs. Last year, our write-offs were $600,000 out of our total budget, which is not very much. So even if our write-offs increase, even double, that's not that much money in comparison of our total budget. What we are more concerned about is making sure our customers, that we are a partner with our customers, that we work with them during this period of time. We give them the extensions they need to work off these balances, that the assistance programs that we're developing are there for them during this time, because we need to make sure that we're there for them, that we're walking with them hand in hand, and that we're not just another anchor as they're struggling through the pandemic. We go on to the next slide. This is a snapshot of our water system debt. Our water system debt is structured a little bit differently. We don't have the same future pressures in water that we have in electric. So we've kept the balances a lot more stable on an annual basis. So you can see we don't really drop off on our annual debt service payment until the middle of the next decade. So that keeps consistency and predictability in our debt service payment. And the slope on our payoff is not nearly as steep as it is with electric. Again, we don't foresee any real regulatory paradigm shift in the industry that's going to cause us the need to clear out some of those balances. But if necessary, we can fill in some of that holes, some of those gaps you see from 2040 on if we need to lower some of our current payments. And on to the next slide, 19. So what have we done since the Great Recession? In the Great Recession, we found ourselves downgraded by various rating agencies. We found ourselves hurting for money. Our customers, our rates were rising at a rapid pace just to try to keep up with our costs. We were moving into more and more renewable energy that we had to pay for. So we found ourselves in a situation where we needed to rebuild how we structured our business. So what did we do? Well, first of all, we had to replenish our financial reserves. That meant continued belt tightening. We continually show you some of the metrics on personnel, how we have a lean business, that we operate much more efficiently than other agencies of our size and structure. So we were able to replenish our financial reserves through continued efficient operations and slow, steady rate changes over time that we were able to implement, that were able to slowly build our cash reserves back up. We also secured a line of credit. We currently have a $100 million line of credit with Wells Fargo that is untapped, that we still have at our disposal. So those cash reserve numbers you saw earlier do not include the drawdown of that line of credit. We could draw that line of credit down tomorrow if we wanted to, all $100 million. So if push comes to shove, we do have the option to draw the line of credit. And that line of credit, though, expires at the end of this calendar year. So this summer, we're going to have to start shopping for another line of credit or renewal of the line of credit with Wells Fargo. This one was established in 2016. It was a 5-year line of credit. Some other things we did were we implemented the environmental mitigation adjustment, which was a rate adjustment to collect for costs related to mitigation of the environment. They could be costs for the marginal increase in cost for renewable energy, or judicial decrees, or legislative actions, regulatory actions, things that impact our business by outside forces that force us to either purchase different kind of power or incur costs that we normally would not incur. We restructured our debt. We talk about this all the time, some of the debt restructurings that we did, that were able to reduce our annual interest payments. We improved our credit rating. I said that we were downgraded after the recession. We were then upgraded subsequent to the recession. And we also, this board also formalized our cash and financial reserve policy to make it for a more robust, more structured cash reserve policy that'll make sure that we have the reserves necessary to withstand whatever shock comes our way. And to the next slide. And what are we doing to help our customers? As I mentioned, we suspended our utility shutoffs. We've reduced our required deposits. But one of the things that we've done recently, I think that is going to help our customers the most, is we recently redirected funding from our efficiency programs into an emergency assistance program, giving every customer the ability to draw from a balance of $250 for an emergency bill credit. Now, this is not something we're necessarily advertising, so we don't want to run at the bank, but it is available for those customers that are facing severe financial distress. They can draw on this $250, and they can do it one time, all $250, or they can draw it down over time as they need it in drips and drabs, as often as they want until they hit the $250 lifetime limit. So we think, I told you there's about 40,000 customers that are in arrears. I'm right now assuming that 40,000 customers are going to need that $250 at some level at some point in time, which equates to $10 million. So we're pulling $10 million essentially from the Business and Community Programs Fund that we built up over time, and we're moving that money into bill credits, emergency bill credits for our customers, so that it's available to them in this time of need. We're not seeing the need yet because we're not disconnecting customers. since we're not disconnecting customers, there's no real urgency for them to use this money. But once we start disconnecting customers, once things move back into the normal realm, you're going to see our call volumes double or triple. You're going to see people calling us in distress. And so at this point, we can use that $250 along with other options that we have, fly heap, et cetera. You can see some of the things we've done. Also, we're currently partnering with community development on economic development grants for small businesses or grants for small businesses. So that's currently in the works as well. Before I move on to our proposed budget, I want to open the floor for questions, comments, concerns that we may have for things I may not have covered, or you have any, if there's any confusion.
Any board members have any questions?
This is John Seymour. I just have a comment. Very well done, very logical, very complete, gave us a lot of information. It would be helpful to me, being on the phone for this meeting, to have a copy of those slides in our packages. It's more difficult for me to follow without having that. So that's my
Mr.
comment.
Seymour, they are in your packet. They were included in the packet.
Okay.
They're at the back. They're at the back of the item, so they're behind all the other budget items.
Okay, well, I do have them then. Anyway, forget that comment.
Okay.
I have no questions other than very well done.
Thank you, Mr. Seymour. Any other questions from the board members? Okay, then we can proceed.
Okay, go ahead, Brian.
Miller?
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I had a quick question, gentlemen. This is Ramesh.
Yes.
You talked about accounts receivable balance is increasing and it's about 12 million now. Was that for the, because you were talking about the water part of the utility, is that for the NIM utilities, both on the electric and water side?
That's our total receivables for both divisions from our residential customers.
Got it, okay.
It shows a sign of distress from those customers and other customers we're most concerned about at this time.
Yes, this is Eddie. Do you hear me?
Yes, we
Hello?
Yes. Go ahead, AB.
Okay, my question is, did you start to redirect funding from efficiency program yet already, or still this is the plan?
That's in the plans. We don't think we're going to see a lot of demand for rebates, et cetera, in the near term, because people won't be installing a lot of appliances, won't really be investing all that much, at least those customers at the margins. Some well-heeled customers may, but we don't think the customers at the margins are really going to be able to take advantage because they're not going to be really doing anything to their dwelling. So I think assisting them with bill assistance is a much more immediate need than necessarily programs.
Let me just add on to that, AB, that one of the categories in public benefits is actually low income or income qualified. So that's a category that the state established back in the late 90s as one of the categories where we collect for public benefit purposes. That includes things like energy efficiency, renewable technologies, research and development, and the fourth category was income qualified. So we have historically put most of the funding towards energy efficiency programs that is available to everybody. And we did have a fair number of income qualified programs, whether they were discounts or rebates or weatherization, things like that. So what Brian is mentioning is because we don't think that there's going to be a heavy demand for those efficiency programs in the coming year or so, because the new refrigerator or the new types of appliances will not be purchased anytime soon, given that people are going through financial distress. So we're essentially redirecting monies in that energy efficiency bucket towards the income qualified bucket, and making the assumption that that category is going to be a qualified expense to be able to help our customers. I hope that helps explain what we're doing for our customers.
Right, and so
I think that's enough. Thank you.
okay. And the law mandates we spend 2.85% of our revenue on these types of programs. And over time, we built up a fund of about $8 million or so on money that we collected or that we reserved for that spending that we didn't actually spend. So we have money already saved up. So this isn't even necessarily money that's all going to be collected this fiscal year. So there's money already in the bank that we can repurpose. We go on to the proposed budget. If we move to slide 22, Peggy. Yes. So you can kind of see this on the top half. This is our revenue. So if you look at our 2020 amended budget, we forecasted we were going to receive about $445 million in electric revenue and $91 million in water revenue. Wasn't quite what we thought there would be. So our electric revenue, as I stated, is below by about 6% what we originally forecast. And water revenue is down about 4%. If you just disregard the bonds, that is not really money that we can use for day-to-day operations. We were down about $29 million in revenue. That's the bad news. However, with there is silver linings to some of these, and if you go down on this sheet, we're able to have some savings on our expenditure side. So our labor savings, we had vacancies that were open longer than we originally anticipated, and supplies and equipment. That some of that is contingency that we didn't need to spend, or there were just expenditures that we started to slow down on that we didn't think we needed to spend. And Graham's group came in far under budget, or planning to come in far under budget on power supply. Water supply is going to come in higher, as we talked about in the rate hearing, with next year coming in even higher because of the PFAS mix. But all in all, if you look at the bottom of this slide on 22, that our total, if you look at our total expenditures were about $40 million below what we originally thought they were going to be. So we're coming in 2020 with a good head of steam. If we go to the next slide, adopted to proposed. So the adopted budget is what the board voted on last fiscal year. So again, you can see what the adopted budget is. $445 million with a proposed revenue of $440 million. Now, let me kind of walk through. It's not, the revenue side isn't as bad, it looks like, from these numbers as I mentioned earlier. Well, we have a reserve fund called our rate stabilization account. Our rate stabilization account is money that we collect from customers on a line item called rate stabilization adjustment that we defer to the future years when we need it. When we need it, we then move it from that fund to our general operating fund, and that's when it counts as revenue. Think of it as like your 401k. You're not taxed on that money until you pull money from that 401k into your general checking account, and then the IRS takes the tax. Well, we don't consider this any kind of revenue until we pull it from the fund. So we're gonna have to pull some money from that fund that we weren't anticipating in order to make sure the books are balanced. That's why that electric revenue number is a little bit higher than you would think. It's not necessarily anything untoward. It just means that we're moving money from one side of the house to the other in order to make sure that we have the revenues necessary to cover our expenses. But as you go down our expense line, our operating expenses are going to come in a little bit higher than this fiscal year, about 1% higher on operating expenses. So you can kind of see the breakdown on our operating expenses. Obviously, the major source of that variance is going to be water supply. Because of the change in mix, our water supply, we can't really change that number. We can't. That number is what it is. It's based on the inability to pump water from most of our wells. So where are we going to get savings? We're going to have to defer capital. So you can look at capital expense, and that's how we're going to defer or save some money in the budget in order to come in at a level that we need to make sure that we continue to slowly spend down our reserve balances and there's not a run on our reserves. One thing I would like to note though, on labor, there's a little asterisk, but also labor, we don't really know what the labor cost necessarily going to be. That number was loaded in by our human resources department before COVID-19. Right now, I think there might be discussions with various labor groups. That number may change going forward if there are variances in our labor costs due to any kind of concessions, any kind of changes in various agreements or salary structures. We'll make sure we note that to you. You go on to the next slide, 24. Let's just focus solely on the electric utility. I don't need to spend a lot of time. These are numbers we just saw. This just breaks it down agency by agency. And you can see again that we're going to come in about 3-4% under budget, largely due to capital expenses with some savings in supplies and equipment. Move to the water utility. We won't be able to come in under, we won't be able to reduce our budget in fiscal 21 compared to fiscal 2020, again, because of the supply cost increases. But we are making almost equal reductions in our capital expenses. Some of those items that we are deferring, I showed earlier, but there's some main lines, there's a water recycling plant, and there's other costs that we are deferring. Go on the next slide. So what are we doing in order to mitigate and in order to reduce costs that we can control besides capital? So obviously there's a hiring freeze. I think that goes without saying. Right now there's 10 vacant positions that we'll keep frozen. And as attrition occurs, we feel most of those positions may be frozen unless they are critical to the service we provide. That will be a discussion that we have with HR, which positions we will be able to hire, which positions will stay frozen. But there is a hiring freeze. Some of the technology upgrades we want to do will defer to future years. And I mentioned earlier fleet replacements. And I know staff travel and training, it's not a lot of money, but it's still, it's not the right time, obviously, for anybody to be traveling or attending any seminars or conferences, et cetera. Again, if you look at the bottom, the customer assistance, we are redirecting money from efficiency rebate incentives to emergency customer assistance. So we're moving $3 million from one bucket to the other. We go to the next slide. Some of the capital that we are doing, though, is we're deferring the solar for schools to fiscal 2022. However, we still plan on doing 4,000 streetlight installations, and various undergrounding districts will continue. We are planning to do about 4.5 miles or so of water mains, 23,000 feet, and groundwater treatment for PFAS. So design for that treatment plant is planned for fiscal 2021. So those are not deferred. On the groundwater treatment, we do forecast the design cost to be about $1.5 million this fiscal year. And with that, we are open for any questions you may have.
Any members of the board have any questions?
Yeah, this is John. I actually have 2 questions. My first question is on the report under discussion. The last sentence says discussion remains ongoing with the city manager's office and other departments, which may result in additional budgetary adjustments. Can you give me some context around that sentence?
Yeah, let me start on that one, Brian, and help fill me in for anything that I missed. What's happening right now is many cities are struggling financially, as I'm sure that the board members have seen in the news. There was a report about Westminster being in the hole about close to $20 million. That's going to result in first response type of activities, having to have layoffs and things of that nature. So as cities continue to grapple with general fund issues, our city is in the same type of situation. It might even be a little bit more elevated given our reliance on transit occupancy taxes or hotel bed taxes. And so as a result, our city is looking at all sorts of different options. And as Brian mentioned, there are discussions going on right now with labor groups to talk about what can we do to help fill the hole created in the general fund. So as those discussions go on, what we're going to watch is how much of that is going to apply to the utility. Obviously, while we have a different funding mechanism, we do have depressed loads and depressed revenues. And so we're going to have to participate in some of those activities. Now, whether they're furlough type activities or we've already mentioned the hiring freeze, could it lead to something like layoffs? Those are the discussions that are being had now. And we don't know what the answers are to those questions. But we're participating with the city manager's office, with human resources, with finance, to help be part of the solution rather than our own separate entity. So those are some of the things that are going on right now, Mr. Seymour, as we try to figure out how do we navigate through this as a city and then also as a department within the city.
Just as a position, as a board member, I would be against laying off any of our utility employees. We're very lean as it is. And the morale issues associated with that would carry with us for a very long time. So I am hopeful that it does not result in an order to lay off Anaheim Public Utility employees. And also I would question furloughs, but I'm less, depends on what they are. What that amounts to. I just wanted to state that as a position.
Yes, and if I could just interject that I agree with your position. Obviously, we really care about our employees and how hard they work to serve customers given the leanness of our organization. So we're in those discussions. And secondly, if we do some type of a furlough, as an example, where, there's a certain a day out of a pay period, perhaps that that people go without the pay or they have to take that day off. It may not help us, and the reason why is because our operations are 24/7. So you can't just take a crew and say you're not going to work on this particular day because there could be an outage or some other action that requires that we call them in anyway. So those are the things that we're expressing to both the city manager's office and to human resources to explain that our operation is a little bit different than some of the other departments. And so they're open and receptive to those issues and trying to understand, how best to navigate through this. So again, it's very highly participatory. It's at the very early stages right now, and we remain hopeful that we can come to a good resolution to this. But thank you for your comments.
Relative to that, before we took that action, would you bring those actions before the board?
So if there is something that's mandated by the city manager's office and human resources, while we will try to schedule something with the board, it may not be, from a timing perspective, it may be an after action report. So I can't promise that the timing will work out. And even today, I'm not clear what the timing is. There's still ongoing discussions this week with the various labor groups, and they've already instituted a hiring freeze. And so I will try my best, sir, to try to bring an item before the board, but I can't promise that.
Okay, but I think you could say the board is behind you in terms of resisting those kinds of actions.
Certainly. Thank you.
Okay, my second question. Also on that first page of the report, we're deferring non-critical utility projects such as an underground projects are listed. Since this is a specific assessment for this particular activity, are we allowed to not spend that money and to put it someplace else?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and let me explain that. We're talking about one project, and one project that we had anticipated to go into construction in this next fiscal year. What we're anticipating is just pushing it off for about 3 or 4 months, and then finishing up the design, and then going into construction the following fiscal year. So we're talking about a delay of about 3 or 4 months that helps us with the reducing our budget by, as you recall, we have to encumber the entire capital project cost in the fiscal year when we issue that construction project. And so that's why it would be, I want to say about 4 or 5 million into this current budget or this upcoming budget if we didn't do that delay. So it's not a astronomical delay. We're talking about a quarter essentially.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the action. I have a different question. Since this is a specific assessment, how is the regulation that surrounds it allow us to not spend that money or put that money someplace else?
So it is a specific fund and it's geared towards undergrounding. So all the money has to be used on undergrounding. There is nothing that says we have to spend all the money every single year. It doesn't prescribe exactly how much to spend in a given year. That's done through the budgetary process.
Okay, that helps a lot. Thank you. My third question is, and this really goes to Michael and to Janice. There is a substantial reduction in both water field capital as well as electrical field capital. And it's out of norm for what we plan in the future as well as in the past. And my question is, what degree of risk are we undertaking as a result of this action?
Let me ask Janet if you wouldn't mind going first, and then Michael if you wouldn't mind going second.
Sure, Board Member Seymour. As far as electric capital projects, what we continue, as Duke had mentioned, we continue with our underground conversion, as that is a specific fund that goes towards those projects. Some other of our capital projects that we don't defer is our direct buried cable replacement. And if you remember, that's the cable that's buried directly in the dirt that we will replace with something more substantial, a cable and conduit, particularly in East Anaheim. We continue with those projects as that directly impacts our electric reliability. Some deferred projects that we could look at is more of our substation upgrades. We're not seeing a reliability issue there. However, they are aging infrastructure, and we have the ability. It's a calculated risk to defer. However, I think it's a risk we can take, but we continue to plan in the future for some upgrades of our substation work.
So you would categorize the service reliability of these reductions as low, medium, or high?
I would categorize them as medium.
Okay,
In
thank you.
that, as I said, we are prioritizing the projects that more directly impact our electric reliability, which is the direct buried cable replacement, undergrounding, and those things. Where I say medium is our substation work. We have the ability, as you know, our harbor sub, for example, we have the ability to reroute power should we have an impact at a substation. So we have a little bit more operational flexibility there. And so that's why I say more of a medium impact, because we do have the ability to reroute power.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Michael.
Yes, on the water side, I would say the effect of the reduction in our capital improvement program, which typically is 25 to 30 million a year, and as Brian showed, this year is 17 million. The effect is very low. That 17 million is primarily dedicated to our pipelines. So our reliability, which is very important with our pipelines, is something that we're going to continue with. We've pulled back on some projects such as AMI, which the technology for the water meters are not ready yet anyways, and also on new well drilling that we're postponing because we have the PFAS issue also. The main project that we are going forward with that is of vital importance is the groundwater treatment that we need to do to bring our groundwater wells back online. And if you remember, we were planning on doing the Anaheim South Recycle Water Project, and we're postponing that project. And we're going to be using that budget that we were planning to spend this current fiscal year for that project that we plan to encumber late next year or early the following fiscal year. So we do have a budget to continue with that groundwater treatment plant project and our pipelines, which are the two most important things that we have going forward at this time.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Michael.
Any other questions from board members?
I just have a very short questions. Are all the contracts are in hold? The approved contract are in hold, or still is it going to be impacted by this budget?
So let me start off. In terms of contracts that have been issued today, we have been able to proceed with those projects. So it's for other types of expenditures where we haven't entered into a construction contract or another type of contract. Those are the ones that we're deferring, postponing, or canceling.
Okay. Also, I just go back to John's question. Also, if we have a project, special funds coming from the federal government or from the state, still we are allowed to redirect this fund for other expenses?
So it depends on what the money is for. So in terms of our energy efficiency money, we collect that ourselves from our customers, and we have historically used it for certain purposes. And as I mentioned, we're just redirecting it into another one of the buckets. So that's something that we do have control over. There's another item, a secondary agenda item, actually number 3, where we're going to be talking about federal funds that are going to be able to be used for helping customers pay their electric bills. That's restricted, and that's only for electric bill use. You can't even use it for water bills. So that's something that is earmarked for a specific purpose and may only be used for that purpose. So it really kind of depends on what we're talking about.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for board members? Hearing none. Proceed, Mr. Lee.
Okay, so that was just a presentation, and so
I think, do we need action to recommend the budget to the city council?
that's right. I'm sorry. Yes, so we're ready for a roll call vote then.
So, I mean, yeah, if I could get the motion to submit the approval of the proposed budget to the city council.
Mr.
I
John
move the
Seymour.
motion.
Motion made by, who's this?
AB.
Member Abdul Rahman, can I get a second?
I second.
Second by member, is that member Gaona?
Yes, sir.
Please identify, will you make the motion, the second, please identify yourself. So it's been a motion been made and seconded, we'll go for a roll call vote.
This is a roll call vote for item number 2. Board Member Gaona,
Aye.
Board Member Bala. Board Member Bala, you're muted.
Aye.
Board Member Abdul Rahman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Seymour,
Aye.
and Chair Madrano.
Aye.
The vote is 5 ayes, 0 nays, 2 absent, not present. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the direct payment agreement between the State of California Department of Community Services and Development of the City of and the City of Anaheim to receive federally funded low-income home energy assistance program grant funding to some our electrical customers apparently.
that's correct. And so this is Brian's item as well. Brian?
Great, thank you, Dooku. As we mentioned earlier, we do receive additional support from the federal government for a program called LIHEAP, which is Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. Through the CARES Act, they actually increased the funding for LIHEAP, and they granted to the states based on population and other means of allocation. So this agreement would be through the state of California, through the Department of Community Services and Development, and actually through through Orange County CAP, which is the Community Action Partnership of Orange County. There's no actual amount that we know how much is going to be granted for customers. Customers can be granted up to $1,000 in LIHEAP in a given period of time, in a given year, but typically they get about $200 through the application process. So this is, again, is another assistance program that we offer customers. The agreement that we had expired. We do have an extension right now as we go through the approval process. This new agreement will last us through 2023. Again, we don't know how much money will be given. We don't know how many customers will be assisted. It's all based on the amount of funding available and the need of the community. But we use every means available to us to market this program to those customers that need it. And it's, I think we've granted, I think about $3 million or so has been granted to our customers over the last 5 years or so. So it is used pretty significantly by our customer base. And again, one more tool that we have at our disposal to help our customers. Right now, they need every tool that we can provide them. Are there any questions? I don't have anything else.
Are there any questions from board members? No questions. I'll entertain a motion to approve this agreement.
This is John Seymour. I'll make that motion.
Motion made by Vice Chair Seymour. Can I get a second?
This is Ravneesh Bala, I second it.
Second by Member Bala. Can we have a roll call vote?
This is a roll call vote for item number 3. Board Member Guyona,
Aye.
Board
Yay.
Member Bala,
Aye.
Board Member Abdulrahman,
Aye.
Chair Seymour,
Aye.
Chairman Madrano.
Aye.
The vote is 5 ayes, 0 nays, 2 absent, not present. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, we have the reimbursement agreement with the Orange County Water District, consulting agreement with Brown and Caldwell related to the groundwater treatment facilities. Will this be Mr. Moore or Mr. Lee?
This will be Mr. Moore, and as he prepares to give you the presentation, I can't stress how important this agreement is and how heavily involved our city attorney's office, Ms. Scott, was in helping to get us to this point. She worked very closely with Michael and his team as we put this together for your consideration. Michael?
Yes, thank you. This item is related to us constructing our PFAS treatment plants, our groundwater treatment plants for our 14 of our 19 wells that are currently out of service due to this compound. As you guys have been informed, that compound has caused us to shut down those 14 of our wells, which has resulted in us importing a lot more water from Metropolitan Water District rather than pumping our cheapest water supply, which is our groundwater that we have. That results in about a $15 million per year additional expense for water supply. So we're anxious to get these treatment plants online as soon as possible so we can start pumping that groundwater. That cost to construct those groundwater treatment plants would typically be borne by the water agency like the city of Anaheim. However, over the past 6 months, we've been working with the Orange County Water District to have the greater, all 19 water agencies fund the construction costs and half of the operations and maintenance costs for those treatment plants for the affected agencies. The concept is that the cost of groundwater should be similar for all water agencies in the Orange County Water District, whether you're Huntington Beach or whether you're Yorba Linda or whether you're Anaheim. So the cost this cost for these treatment plants and half the operations and maintenance will be shared amongst all those agencies, which is a really phenomenal concept that we've been able to get that policy and these agreements put together between us, Orange County Water District, and the city attorney's office. So this agreement with Orange County Water District will do that. It will help us get reimbursed for most, if not all, of our capital costs to construct these treatment plants that we would design and construct. And also for 30 years, half the operations and maintenance costs of those treatment plants costs that we have to pay for that. In addition to that, we have a second agreement here that will provide a consultant, Brown and Caldwell, to help us with the procurement for the design and construction or the design build of the treatment plants. And so that contract is for $1 million per year for 5 years. Those are the two agreements that are before the board tonight that we're asking for recommendation to the city council. Are there any questions?
Just a comment. I'm absolutely amazed you were able to create that agreement for shared costs across the whole. Good job.
Yes, and a lot of credit goes to Michael as well. He worked extremely hard with the various water producers and with Orange County Water District to help structure something like this, understanding that there's a benefit for all the water agencies for us to be able to use the groundwater system the way that we have in the past. So kudos to Michael and his team.
Any questions from board members?
I just have a question. How many wells right now are online?
So we currently have 4 wells that are online. They're primarily in the western part of the city.
All right. I just want to make sure we shut down all the wells, or still there's some wells online. So.
Any of the wells that are below the new regulatory limits, we're keeping in operation. If they're above the new regulatory limits, we've taken them offline.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members? Hearing no questions, is that the report?
Yes.
And then I'll entertain a motion to approve the reimbursement agreement with the OCWD and the consulting agreement. I get a motion.
I move the motion.
Motion made by member Roman. And a second?
Rudy
John
Gaona.
Seymour, I'll second it.
Member Gaona, second. Have a roll call vote?
This is the roll call vote for item number 4. Board Member Gaona,
Yay.
Board Member Bala,
Aye.
Board Member Abdulrahman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Seymour,
Aye.
Chair Madrano.
Aye.
The vote is 5 ayes, no nays, 2 absent, not present. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the Environmental Waste Management Services Agreement between the city and the Ocean Blue Environmental Services.
All right, and this is Janice Freeman's item. Janice?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'd like your approval to take to the City Council a waste hauler agreement with Ocean Blue Environmental Services. These services are used on a routine basis as well as an emergency basis and are vital to ensuring that hazardous materials are handled correctly and in a timely manner. The utility handles multiple types of hazardous materials, ranging from used paint to transformer oils, and this company can respond to issues within 2 hours and has the equipment and resources to help contain the spills and to help prevent them from entering waterways. The company had the best cost for the service levels and resources provided. They have experience with working with other utilities, and they have the proper training, licensing, and insurance requirements. And so with that, I'd like to ask your approval to bring this to City Council.
Thank you. Does any members of the board have any questions?
I have a question. This is Abby. For the waste hauler company, is this an extension of the existing contract, or this is kind of a renewal of the contract, and that need to go through the bidding process?
Yes, this is a new agreement, and it has gone through the competitive bidding process. I believe there were 7 competitors for this. It was reviewed by 3 staff members in a very formal ranking process. So yes, this is new, and it's vetted through a competitive process.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the
This is John Seymour. I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion made by Vice Chair Seymour. Can I get a second?
This is AB. I'll second.
A second by Member Abdul Rahman. Can we get a roll call vote?
This is the roll call vote for item number 5. Board Member Guyona,
Aye.
Board Member Bala,
Aye.
Board Member Abdul Rahman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Seymour,
Aye.
Chair Madrano.
Aye.
The vote is 5 ayes, 0 nays, 2 absent, not present. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item we have a couple of department orders here. Three.
Janice, are you gonna talk about these as well?
Yes, I can do that. I think Melinda was planning
Oh,
on it.
I'm sorry. Play Melinda.
Sure, not a problem. So good evening. In front of you tonight are 2 department orders that have recently been updated. Department Order 350, Procurement of Long-Term Energy-Related Resources, was originally approved by the Public Utilities Board in July of 2016. The department order was established to have a process and procedure in place for the procurement of energy-related resources. The recent updates are to ensure that the department order remains up to date with current practices and to further reinforce key principles of the procurement process. The changes provide clarification that all energy-related resources procurement is conducted in a fair, competitive process and follow all of APU and city policies and procedures. Department Order 501, North American Reliability Corporation and Western Electricity Coordinating Council Internal Compliance Program, well, that was a mouthful, was revised and last approved by the Public Utilities Board in May of 2016. The department order was established to document the internal policies, procedures, and guidelines established to ensure that the department remains in compliance with mandatory and enforceable NERC and WAC reliability standards and to fulfill our role in protecting the reliability of the bulk electric system. The recent updates include new practices on how the Western Electricity Coordination Council will conduct audits and updated training requirements to align with reliability standards. That's a summary of those 2 department orders that we've brought to you for approval. And if there are any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them.
Any questions from board members? No questions from board members. Thank you.
Sure.
Does require an approval? Yes, but it doesn't go to city council because what will happen is if this is approved, then we will post it on our website.
Correct. So can I get a motion to approve the department orders?
I'll make that
move the
motion.
Motion made by Vice Chair Seymour. Can I get a second?
Second by AB.
Second by Member Abdul Rahman. Can we get a roll call vote?
This is a roll call vote for item number 6. Board Member Guyona,
Aye.
Board Member Bala,
Aye.
Board Member Abdul Rahman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Seymour,
Aye.
Chair Madrano.
Aye.
The vote is 5 ayes, 0 nays, 2 absent, not present. Motion carries.
Excellent. Next item we have is an update on the electric system issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have 2 items for you and the board tonight. The first is a recognition. And Peggy, if you can pull up those slides. This is a pending retirement of one of our troubleshooters, John Batchman, who's been with the department for 33 years. His retirement will be on June 5th. And ordinarily, I would invite John to join us at a board meeting, but given the circumstances here, this is the second best thing to do. Just a little bit about John is he started with the city of Anaheim in 1986 as a laborer, maintenance, and street sweeper for public works. And he came to utilities in 1997 as a groundman, and then later, a year later, entered into the apprenticeship and was a line mechanic for 7 years, until he joined as a troubleshooter in 2008 and has been a troubleshooter ever since. John is always a pleasure to talk to and well liked by our customers and his coworkers, and has a very positive attitude. Just some of his hobbies I'd like to share with you. He likes to fly model RC planes and helicopters. He's very good at it too. I've seen that. My son does that as well, and it's easier. It's harder than it looks. He's very handy. He plans to finish remodeling his cabin, build a greenhouse, and get his electrical contractor's license. So he's been a major asset to the department, and we certainly wish John Batchman great success in his retirement.
He does not look old enough to retire.
Thank you.
Okay, and the second item I'd like to share with the board is one of our direct buried cable replacement projects completed. This project is in the Lake Summit community in Anaheim Hills. It was prioritized because as a result of multiple outages from the deteriorated cable, as we talked about with Board Member Seymour earlier. We finished this project earlier this year, and we received some nice feedback from a customer, and it's a customer with a long history in Anaheim. His name is Horst Shore. And this feedback came to our electric system designer, Ted Mai, who was the project manager on the job. He says, I owe you a big thank you for the outstanding job and want to express my appreciation for how well you set it up, coordinated it with all the parties involved, and brought it to completion in record time. So as you can see, this is what it looked like before. It's kind of a snapshot of the area it's at. And Peggy, if you could show us the after picture. As you can see, they've addressed the standing water conditions, replaced erosion control planting, and greatly improved the aesthetics of the city staff and myself, meaning Mr. Horst Shore, implemented the master plan of development for this planned community in Anaheim Hills. So he was one of the original master plan developers for this project. So that was a nice feedback from our customers. As you can see, a great improvement to the area, and more importantly, definitely direct impact to electric reliability improvement for that area. And I just wanted to share that with the board and to thank Ted Mai for a very good job of managing this project. And that's all I have if there's any questions.
Any questions from members of the board? Hearing none, then thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next item we have is an update on water system issues.
Yes, with the shutdown of City Hall and many of the facilities due to the coronavirus, including the community centers, the Community Services Department has numerous staff that used to work at the part-time staff that used to work at the community service that don't have any work to do. We had some budget to paint fire hydrants, to have a contractor paint them, and we have utilized, if you want to go to that slide, Peggy, the water services update. We had utilized that staff to, or some of that budget, to have about 20 of the community services staff go around the city for the past couple months and repaint our much needed fire hydrants, which have been looking in poor condition and something that we've been wanting to do for a long time. If you've driven around the city, you probably noticed a lot more good-looking fire hydrants than poor-looking fire hydrants, and that's largely in part due to these young staff from the Community Services Department that have been going around painting these fire hydrants for the past couple months. Go to the next slide. The piece of equipment that we've been wanting to get and we've been needing is a Vector truck like this one that just arrived 2 weeks ago that we purchased. This is a big vacuum cleaner that also digs through the dirt and can suck up dirt, rocks, water, and puts it inside that tank. And we had acquired a used one from Public Works a few years ago, tried it. It was an old one that they were getting rid of, and we took it over, we put some money into it, upgraded it, and used it for about a year before it broke. And we realized that it really helps us do work in a much safer, faster manner then bringing a big excavator out there, a big truck to suck up the water that may be spilling due to a main break. We can do that all with this piece of equipment, save time, and work in a lot safer manner. So this is our staff getting trained on how to use it 2 weeks ago, and we just are putting it into operations now, and they're very excited to have this piece of equipment and the investment that we're making to help make their job safer and to do the job better. And then lastly, going to go to the next one. The Walnut Canyon Reservoir opened up last Friday. The walking trail around the reservoir opened up last Friday. We had talked to internally and talked to community services and different staff at the Emergency Operations Center about how we can do that in a safe manner. So we made signs that recommends face masks, recommends social distancing, but also recommends walking and biking in a single direction, so you're not passing by as many people. So here is one of our staff members last week, our field staff member, painting some arrows and some signs to remind people what direction to go in to be safe while they're out there. And looking at the pictures and the videos that we have from that walking trail over the weekend, it was widely used, and comments on social media also were very positive that we opened that up for the community in time for Memorial Day weekend. And that is all my updates.
Any questions from board members?
Just a comment. This is John. My wife will be happy on opening up that trail.
Excellent. Thank you, Vice Chair Seymour. Next item, we'll have an update on finance issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to direct your attention to the dashboard in your packet. I really just want to focus on the revenue. Again, I'm going to talk about our revenue situation. If you look at April, we were a little more than 10% below budget in April, and that still has March noise in it. Remember, when we bill our customers, we bill them for 30 or 60 days of usage. So that April revenue is going back into March or February before the emergency began. So we really will know more about our revenue situation as you go into May and June and see some of these bills for our customers. But what we're starting to see is, that the softness will continue. You do have significant savings on the expenditure side, but if that 10% drop in revenue hits 20% or so, then more conversations with the board will need to be had about what we're going to do to mitigate, except instead of just drawing down reserves, say a short-term solution to potentially a long-term problem. So this 10% reduction in revenue could very easily become 15%, 20% in the coming months, especially as we enter into summer, where we expect much higher revenues. As you can see on the far left of this chart, what typical revenue numbers are like in summer. If we're at 10, 15, 20% below those numbers, then we're going to see significant hits to our reserves. On water, we're not, if you flip the page, the water, we're not in the same situation. And as I mentioned in my presentation, we're just slightly below budget in April, 3% below budget for the year. Costs are about in line with what we expected. So water, we are on a net budget basis in fine shape. We will continue to monitor this and present solutions as necessary.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the board? Comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to an update on power supply issues. Grant?
Thank you very much, Thank you, the board. So turning to power supply, I've got two items for you. So first is the power supply dashboard, and turn your attention to the total generation chart for a minute. And as you can see, for the past few months, we've been actually generating way below what we expected to generate for those months. Typically, that's because we are rolling into cooler weather, and the loads just haven't materialized as we expected them to over the course of the last few months. Specifically in the last month, with March and April, we've seen some lower loads as well because of COVID-19, typically more so on the building side versus or commercial side versus the residential side. I think Brian pointed that out earlier. With regards to generation at this point in time, Claymont, as you know, has continued to stay out. We're going to continue. We'll take it off of our reporting as we actually get closer to July 1. You won't be seeing that anymore. But as you know, it's budgeted through July 1 as part of our normal budget process. With regards to a couple of outages we've been having, we're in a position right now where we're getting ready for the summer operations. Therefore, we need to have some outages on our units. So what we've done over the last month, especially in the beginning of May, we've had all of our canyon units out for pre-summer outages. And what that means is we go through, we change the oil when the filter, just like you would in a car. We also all the units to make sure the clearances are right on the blades. There's no nicks, cracks, erosion, or anything like that within the unit itself. We also check the balance of plant. We check the lubrication for towers and fan motors, chillers, and we also conduct fire tests on the system to make sure we can operate safely. As we go through this, we did experience one leak for fire systems in one of the units. We fixed that for Unit 1 earlier in the maintenance outage. So all in all, the outage prospects and operational prospects for these generation units coming into some look good. We have no major outages to report when it comes to that. With regards to renewable generation, yeah, we're slightly below generation still. Typically, it's the wind that's picking up and causing us to at least balance that out from the biofuels and the hydro generation, which is typically a lot less, especially the MWD hydro. It's a small hydro facility that comes down through run of conduit. And those conduits right now, they're typically dry, so we don't see much of generation as we get into these months. But the other thing is that we are running our coal plant a little bit higher than we would normally run it, and that's because the coal pricing right now is slightly better than that of the gas prices that we're seeing. Gas prices have not spiked. Natural gas prices haven't spiked because of COVID-19 or anything like that. We continue to see relatively low prices, but at this point in time, coal is just pitting, if you like, gas at the post, and coal is the unit of choice for dispatch at this point in time. With that said, we are seeing low dispatches on our Magnolia unit and also our Canyon. But we expect that to continue for a little while longer before we get into the summer months and we start to see that pick up. But the other thing to note is that during this period of time, we have what's called it's the run of all of the ice that's melting from snowpack, and that we're seeing coming through as well. So we're seeing some negative prices in the market as well, which is helping to depress the overall price that we see for dispatching of our units. That's why we don't see a lot of dispatching of the gas units as well. With regards to wholesale prices, because of that, obviously we're not generating quite as much. Therefore, we're not really recovering our costs. All of our costs are incremental costs for our units. But overall, we are saving on the fact that we have our units are not being dispatched, so we're not actually incurring any cost to run them as well, other than the actual cost for overall cost of the unit as we move forward, as we normally would for our can't think of the word right now, but typically our debt service essentially. With regards to wholesale sales as well, wholesale sales, we hit the target slightly in April. In March, we're a little bit below, and in February, we're way, way below that. And we expect that, like I said, to be for a little while longer. If you turn over to the next page, which is our portfolio generation, our resource mix, you'll see that mostly everything is status quo. Our renewables are hitting their targets of about 37% renewables at this point in time. Our actual magic number is 33%, so we're above the number we need to be for this point in time in the year. And also we're picked up with purchases essentially to cover our costs because it's cheaper to do so than running off the other units. So we see that as well. With regards to the average cost, like I said, the coal is slightly below that of natural gas, and that's why you see it being dispatched. But if you look all the way to the left, you'll see that the California ISO, by far, the cheapest market to buy energy from at this point in time at about 3.19 cents. So that's why you see a lot of purchases that we're making during the period of time for our energy at that point. With that said, any questions with regards to the power supply dashboard?
Any questions from members of the board? No questions.
Okay, one more thing I'd like to point out to you today is normally what we do at this point in time, we normally have each public utility is required to report on the energy efficiency, their goals and their targets to the California Energy Commission. And a report was just issued just a month ago with regards to how we're doing it. It talks about our investments in energy efficiency on our demand reduction programs and our overall expenditures and what they look like and cost effectiveness. So as it compares to other PUs, we look at how well we're doing. So when you look at that from that perspective, we are actually doing a lot better than most of the POUs when we talk about the amount of dollars we spend for every megawatt that we save. So with that, we're far below Pasadena, Riverside, and LA at this point in time, which is the good news. The other good news is right now we are set at a 1.1% annual energy savings, and that's our target, and we've been hitting that for the last several months. But however, with the COVID, I want to preface this, that we don't know what that's going to look like moving forward. So we've got until 2030 to make that up. We'll continue to monitor that, but if there's a large impact of COVID as a result of this, we'll bring that information to you as we see it, and we'll advise you of any actions we're taking to make that energy efficiency up. And with that, that concludes my updates for power supply.
Any questions, board members? Hearing none, we'll go on to the update on enterprise risk and compliance. Janice.
Thank you very much. I do have a couple of updates this afternoon for the Enterprise Risk and Compliance Division. The first one's legislative related. The focus of the legislature, as you might expect, has changed considerably over the last couple of months, and many, if not most, of the bills that we've been following will likely not pass out of the legislature. In their place are a number of bills related to the COVID crisis, and I just want to let you know that none of those will really are expected to significantly impact utility operations. There are a couple of bills that may potentially move that are helpful to us, and I'll just highlight those very quickly. The first is AB 2560 by Quirk that establishes a public, transparent process for setting notification and response levels for unregulated substances in drinking water, such as what we went through with PFAS and PFOA. It's a very beneficial bill. We're supporting that, and hopefully that will be one of the few bills that does pass, not related to COVID this session. The second bill is related to fire hydrants. It's SB 1386. There has been about 80 lawsuits very recently against public utilities related to how fire hydrants are included as part of the utility water rates. And so this bill just would make it very clear that this is an accepted practice, that this is the intent of the law. And so this bill, we're hoping that goes through too. Right now, a lot of the bills that were more controversial, like pump storage, some of the RPS bills, they don't look like they're going to progress. So fingers crossed, this may be a very good legislative session for us. So that's all I have. Oh, what? No, I don't. I have one more. I'm sorry. Peggy, there's a slide. Thank you. Sorry about that. June is National Safety Month. And we will be talking each week on topics with our staff. We'll be having meetings, sending emails, providing information on COVID, some of the impacts related to that, on ergonomics, in particular when you're telecommuting, things that you can do, stretches, positioning of your desk, looking at the safety culture and hazard recognition, and then the ever popular driving. So again, happy National Safety Month in June, and we're kind of excited to be rolling out these programs. And with that, that's all I have.
Any questions, members of the board? Hearing none, next item will go on to items by secretary.
Okay, so next month we have a planned summer load assessment and power supply outlook as a presentation. However, we don't have any planned agenda items as of yet. And there's a number of reasons why. One is, as we mentioned, we've slowed down some of our activities. And so as a result, we don't have any agenda items planned for June. So while I would suggest we still adjourn the meeting to the June, there's a possibility that if no agenda items appear, we may just cancel perhaps the June board meeting and then push the presentation to July. So I just wanted to mention that. Also, July is the beginning of the fiscal year. And typically what we do is at the beginning of the fiscal year, that's when the elections occur for board chair, board vice chair, and then a number of the working groups, such as the underground subcommittee. So if we don't have a meeting in June, we will definitely email all board members a roster of the current makeup of the board and the various committee positions. And then in July, we would have the election and voting process led by Ms. Scott as usual. So I just wanted to flag that for the board so you can start thinking about that in case there may be committees that you want to start to adjust or move on to. In terms of other updates, Nikki, if you could call up the slide. The first area I wanted to talk about was customer engagement. So we'll go to the next slide after that. And we've been really working hard to build a presence on social media, and we have a number of programs that we've been offering to our customers, and we realize that people are going crazy with kids at home and having to work as well as do study time and that type of thing. So one of the things that we came up with, our communications group came up with a little care package for younger kids, and it includes some coloring book materials as well as a utility truck that you can make. And so that's the photo on the left. The photo on the right is actually one of our young customers who built that truck, and the parents posted this cute little image of wearing a hard hat and playing with this truck and doing coloring. So this is little Isaac here, and so I thought it was just a cute way where one of our customers really appreciated what we did. The next slide, Nikki, is a solar car kit. So we were planning on doing a Orange OC Green Expo this summer in June. And obviously with everything going on with COVID, it didn't make sense for us to have 600 or so people congregating. One of the activities that we had planned for that event was Solar Car Challenge, where kids would be able to build these solar car kits and then be able to race them. So since we had the kits, what we decided to do was post the availability of them online, and people responded back. And Graham, what was the total number of car kits that we ended up providing?
Altogether, about 150 car kits.
So 150 car kits went out, and these were paid for by the low carbon fuel standard, the state emissions credit that we monetize. And so it's for educational purposes with electric transportation. And so this was one of the programs that qualified for those types of expenditures. So very successful, and then you can see one of the quotes from one of our customers there. Next slide, Peggy. This is another one of Graham's programs. And we have done things like welcome kits for whenever there's new customers who come into Anaheim. But we realized that there was a way for us to be able to thank those people who are really on the front line. So those include first responders, grocery store workers, healthcare workers. And so Graham and his team put a program together with LED light bulbs as a thank you to recognize all of their contributions and sacrifices that they made on behalf of the Anaheim residents and businesses. So this was a great one. And Graham, do you remember the number on this one? How many kids we handed out?
Yeah, right now it's about 187 kits that we've handed out.
Yeah, so really stellar job by Graham and his team to be able to reach out and still do efficiency and education in a really positive manner. Next slide, Peggy. The other thing that we've done is on social media, we've gotten a number of inquiries from customers on basics about customer service, when the disconnects were happening, what happens to their bills, that type of thing. So we posted short little videos, and the photo on the left is Lisa Nugent, who is our customer service manager, who explained some of the basic, responded to some common questions. And then the image on the right is Myra, who is in our communications team, and she did a Spanish version of that for our residents who are Spanish speaking. So we're just trying to find different ways, given the current circumstances, on how do we reach out and engage with our customers. Those are some examples. Next slide. Thank you. Another thing I wanted to share is, there's a saying that water and electricity don't mix, and I'm going to show you that sometimes they do. So here's a fire hydrant teamwork. In this image, you can see it's a little dark, but there is a fire hydrant wedged underneath this truck. And so it's a car hit hydrant. It happens frequently. And when it does, the next slide shows you what happens. You see a big gush of water coming out of the ground where there used to be a fire hydrant. And the thing you'll notice in this image is there's also an overhead power line in parallel with that the geyser that's coming out of the ground there. So as most people know, you want to steer clear of this because with that water hitting the overhead high voltage lines, there's a possibility that it could become energized and it could be a potential hazard for somebody who touches that water and gets electrocuted. So it's a little hard to see, but there's a fire engine there. And that's their primary purpose right there, is to make sure that no residents or passersby get in harm's way. Next slide. While they were doing that, this is one of our electric troubleshooters. So Janet showed you a picture of John Batchman, and so these are our troubleshooters who are out there. And so they helped the water guys. And what he's doing is he's backing his truck up to cover the water so that it doesn't shoot up into the overhead lines. Next slide. And by him blocking the water from coming up, now it's safe for the water team to come in there and close the valve and turn off that hydrant. So between fire department, electric, and water, it was really a team effort to try to resolve this issue. So good example of working together. A couple other updates that I have. There is some discussions with the city about reopening City Hall and Anaheim West Tower. The current thinking is that sometime in June, potentially mid-June, and still being discussed, so it's not definitive yet, but likely in this upcoming month, we would reopen. So we've had discussions about what services would we start to re-engage our customers with. And because we've been able to do a lot of telecommuting and working with our customers remotely, we're thinking that the engineering services will probably be in the latter phases of that. The other thing that's that occurs in this building is we have our customer service staff on the first floor where they handle customer requests and that type of thing. But on the second floor, there's the employment development department for the state. They actually handle things like unemployment checks and those types of activities. So we're anticipating once this building opens, there's going to be a pretty heavy a rush of people coming in to handle their EDD appointments. And so we didn't want to conflict that with our customer service issues. So we're probably going to be one phase after the initial opening of the building for EDD purposes. So that's been in consultation with the Emergency Operations Center to try to figure out what's the safest way for us to be able to reopen. So the timing is still yet to be determined, but that gives you kind of an idea of how we're planning on reopening. And as we reopen, we would do things like plexiglass and other stations for people to stand, markers, requiring face masks and things like that. So all those issues are still being worked out with the EOC. We still have about half of our workforce telecommuting, so that's about 180 people who are finding ways to either handle customer inquiries on the phone, engineering and design services, other things like that. So Graham's group was very instrumental in providing computers, laptops, or individuals just took their desktops home to be able to work from home. And the last thing I wanted to mention is about the hiring freeze and the overall cost. So those issues are going to be discussed starting on June 9th, which will be the first budget hearing, followed by a second meeting on June 23rd. And so the focus will be on the budget issue going on with the city. And so it should be very engaging to figure out what's going to happen with council's perspective on the budget. And that's all I have, sir.
Thank you. And if there's any questions, I'll go on items by board members. I'll start out with Member Gaona. Anything to report?
Negative.
How about Member Bala? Member Bala? Member Abdul Rahman?
Yeah, I don't know. No, I think. Thank you.
Vice Chair Seymour?
I have just a comment, actually. These are very difficult and challenging times that are certainly a surprise to everyone that we have suffered through this. But I am so thankful that we are in such good financial position as a result of good strategies in our past, that we can make a reasonable run at it. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Seymour.
Um,
I have, yes. Member Bala? I have nothing to report, so at this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion to adjourn.
Motion made by Vice Chair Seymour, seconded by
AB, Abdurrahman.
Member Rahman.
This is Ravneesh, I second it.
Can we get a roll call vote?
This is a roll call vote for item number 14. Board Member Guyona,
Aye.
Board Member Bala. Board Member
Aye.
Bala. Board Member Abdul Rahman,
Aye.
Vice Chair
Aye.
Seymour,
Aye.
Chair Madrano.
Aye.
The vote is 5 ayes, 0 nays, 2 absent, not present. Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you all very much. Good night.